I'm very excited to have Helen Hampson-Smith from Smith Brothers Design here to talk all things Colour Futures and Colour of the Year. Helen, you've just seen Brave Ground, our Colour of the Year. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but tell me, what are your first thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here. I can't wait to use it. That's my initial reaction. I think it's a really versatile colour. It's a very calming colour. And I think it fits within the palettes that you've chosen, because I've seen all of the different palettes that Brave Ground fits into. I'm really pleased with having that as a tool. I like the way that we've got a very warm palette with the Colour of the Year in, and a very cool palette. I tend to lean more towards blues and turquoise colours, which don't really appear this year, which is fine. So I'm quite excited to be challenged by using that much richer, warmer red palette that you've got there. So I can't wait to get using it.
Brilliant. So is there a favourite trend palette in there?
I think I would say the blues and the green palette.
The earth palette.
The earth palette. I think that will probably be more usable for me, but just thinking of the projects that we've got on the moment, we tend to do a lot of workplace design, so they're very calming, and I think it would be very easy to adapt that colour palette into kind of the corporate world. But yeah, I can't wait to use them all.
To have a designer sitting opposite me is a little bit like being sort of talking doctor to doctor, because you know I'm going to be very nervous about, because you are a creative, and I know that you have an enviable back catalogue of Colour Futures. So you've been following Colour Futures, and I know that you've been using Colour Futures for a long time. So how does using Colour Futures and Colour of the Year benefit your work? And tell us about a project that you might have used it to describe how you use it as a tool.
Well, the back catalogue has been hard fought for. I've begged, steal and borrowed the catalogues, purely because I enjoy having the confidence to use the palettes that you come up with. I find that it gives me the confidence to be able to get clients to use more adventurous colour palettes, and also to be able to use the colours in various different ways. So a lot of the projects that we do won't purely be focused on any one use. We predominantly do workplace design, but within the workplace there'll be lots of different areas. So we've been able to use the expertise from yourselves to be able to show how the colours can work together, no matter where they're located.
And have you got a favourite? So from all of the years looking back, have you got a favourite? And if you've got a favourite, where did you use that palette?
I think the year that we've used the most, having looked back at our projects, is 2017, and there's lots of different palettes that we've found worked very well in a mixed use project. So where we've had different areas, the palettes can be used alongside each other. But I would say my favourite is definitely 2016. We did a large airport project with one of the colour palettes from there, and that really, we couldn't really dictate exactly where each colour was meant to go, so we provided the client with the palette, and they could then pick and choose a colour from the palette they wanted.
So getting clients to agree your colour choices is probably one of the most difficult things in design. How does Colour Futures help you to convince the client about your choices?
The expertise of colour theory, but using it and adapting it for the project for any particular client. So we've got a lot to think about when we're doing a full interior design scheme. So having that ability to reassure a client that the colour scheme that we're using comes with a lot of research and a lot of knowledge, I think is very helpful.
And do you think the imagery helps when you're sort of like, so the imagery of Colour Futures, so does that help reassure?
Yeah, I think we've used the images quite a lot on some projects. Other projects we would find our own images, but we find it very helpful if we're trying to pull a scheme together quite quickly, then those images are showing how the colour could be used. And we find it also that sometimes the images will help a client develop the design with us. So we'll maybe have an idea of how the colours should work, but they'll come back to us and go, well, actually we prefer the way that the colour's been used in this image. So it helps develop the project and develop the scheme with a client. I think clients feel if they've been involved I think they appreciate the end result a lot more. So that dialogue with the client is very helpful.
I think they invest in it more, don't they? Yeah, and I think there's a whole thing. My whole life I've been fighting against white and monochromatic colours, and especially in design, is this love and being wedded to the very sort of simple purity of things. But I am starting to see that colours are creeping in. People are starting to understand the benefit of using colour to unlock not just the way a building looks, but the way it feels and its performance. Have you got any examples of that? Because when you're talking about design, you talk about the look and the feel and what's happening in that space. And do you use colour to unlock that potential?
I think clients now are more aware of how colour and design can affect people's well-being, and we predominantly do design for workplaces, and there's a big concern at the moment about workplace well-being and mental health, and we find that clients are much more interested in the application of colour. There's a lot of talk about biophilia and introducing the outside space into internal spaces, but we find that doesn't necessarily need to be green, doesn't necessarily need to be planting. It can be textures, it can be materials, so introducing more wooden finishes, but also having more warmer colours and a softer palette that makes people feel relaxed and makes people ultimately more happy to be at work.
In the light of the fact that the world has changed so fundamentally, and working conditions where people are working and what we're using offices for, in the future, how is that going to affect design? What are going to be the biggest challenges you face as a designer, do you think?
Well, I'm very optimistic. I'm hoping that environmental issues will be at the forefront of projects. We've got a lot of experience on big projects, and sometimes environmental credentials are just not even considered. It's something that we like to promote as a design practice, so I'm hoping that the current situation and all the changes that are happening at the moment, that people will be asking more questions about environmental products and more sustainable workplaces. So it's a very exciting time for us designing workplaces. There's a lot of change, we're looking forward to it.
I think everything's been moving, and one of the lovely things, I think, as we've been in lockdown, we've appreciated nature, and we've seen, firsthand our impact on it, and we've enjoyed nature sort of recovering, haven't we? So I think that I do feel that we'll be thinking about the environment and our well-being.
I look to past ColourFutures palettes. Mm-hmm. How much do they influence the next year's colour palettes? Is it something you like to?
A trend is, fashion is like this, very, very quick, and it changes quickly. A trend has to connect. So all of our past trends connect with the next one. It tells a story that develops. Things just don't pop out of thin air. And so colours from the past will always be present in the next. So for example, the colour of the year from the past will be in the next colour of the year palette. Yeah, it'll always be in there somewhere, because we don't all redecorate every year. There has to be a connecting thread. And so it's an organic transition. And that's what I think that's what makes it so beautiful. And also, when we're doing trend forecasting, it's about people. People are at the very centre, and what people want and what they need from their interiors and their living spaces are at the very centre of our design process. It's not necessarily about materials and design inform some of the decisions, but it's much more about how people are living and working in those spaces, and that's absolutely fundamental to the success of ColourFutures, I believe.
One thing that's I've always wanted to ask, how do you come up with the names? How important are the names?
The names are so important, because
you need to have a name. When it will bring the story, it will give you a richer experience of a colour if the name is right. If the name's rotten, even if the colour's beautiful, you won't want it on your wall. So naming is really important. And we do this thing called alchemy. So we have an alchemy process. So we have to think of 2 words. So one word that takes you to the colour, so it could be blue or it could be plum, for example. So plum will take you to a beautiful sort of rosy red plum colour. And then the other word has to take you to how that makes you feel. So it's to the heart of the colour. So it's an emotional. So for example, sumptuous plum. Mm-hmm. So sumptuous gives you that luxurious sort of like this luxurious, it almost becomes tactile, and plum gives us the colour. So it's a combination of 2 words that take you to the look and the feel of the colour. And naming colours Honestly, Helen, you will have to do it with us one day. It is the best fun ever. It really is. It takes us a long time, but it's really good.
Well,
and
I've made decisions on colours. If it's between a few, I'll go with the name. I will.
Yeah, it's really important. Really important. It's part of the storytelling. And again, as a creative, as a designer, that's an important tool for you. To be able to, if you're talking to a client and you have a beautiful colour name, it immediately builds a picture of what that colour's wanting to achieve in a space. So yeah.
How do you work through the subtleties of the colour choice within each individual palette? Because it must be quite hard to make a decision between, you know, two very close colours. How does that process happen?
When we're putting colours together, the colours tell a story. And we will always have, if we're putting the ColourFutures palettes together, there will always be, the palettes will be in two halves. So it will either be light and dark or warm and cool. And so you'll have four or 4 or 5 rich colours, we have 5 rich colours, and then 5 really, really pale colours to balance. So it's all about balancing. And then that becomes a tool for a creative. And so you as a designer will choose to use the colours with emphasis to draw attention, or use colours to create a soft environment. And I think when you see the photography, we will emphasise the softer end of the palette, and then we'll sort of throw in some really, really strong colours. And so it tells a story that you use as a toolbox.
And have you ever been surprised by how anyone's used a particular colour what's the craziest thing that you've seen?
I am always surprised. I'm constantly surprised, because we work with creatives, and creatives interpret our palettes in different ways. So whereas I might have a favourite in one of the palettes, I think, oh, that's absolutely gorgeous. That just might not be. It's my idea of heaven and your idea of hell. And you as a designer would use it in a different kind of way. So that's one of the joys of my job, is constantly being delighted by the way other people interpret what we do. And it also gives us confidence that we're doing the right thing, because in other people's hands, it becomes like the ingredients in a cake or something. You have your raw ingredients, and give those ingredients to Ottolenghi, and wow, you've got an amazing stuff. Give them to Delia, another type of thing. They are just ingredients, and every day I am delighted by what creatives do with them.
Well, hopefully we'll do something interesting.
I think you will. Helen, it's been a joy talking to you. I love talking to creatives about the thing I love most, and thank you for bringing ColourFutures to life in your projects.
Thank you for inviting me.